Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about ghost megachurches once again. We haven't talked about this in a while, but for all it's worth, I'm going to give you a little catch up on the last time we did this series, and that was a video on David Youth in FBC Orlando. This was a megachurch in Florida, a very prominent SBC church. Specifically with David Youth, he's a Big Eva player and certainly a player within the Southern Baptist Convention. And his church is a shadow of its former self. When his church locked down in disobedience to the Bible, his congregants didn't really return. And that's the story that I told, and I took screenshots of parts of the sermon and I showed them. And it's a very interesting video that I did because, again, I provided the firsthand evidence of their sermons and their live streams and, across the board. And it was a shadow of its former self. This church, once they shut down and said they weren't essential, I think their congregants agreed and they didn't really return. And that was in a state with a more anti-Branch Covidian culture than, say, the state above it or the state above that. Certainly more anti-Branch Covidian than the state of Maryland, where most every church locked down, unfortunately, in disobedience to God. So, with that said, we're going to talk about another church that locked down in disobedience to God, a point that I'm stressing a lot if you can't tell. And that is the Potter's House, Denver, Colorado. Now, if that name sounds familiar, the Potter's House, that is the church that T.D. Jakes preaches at, I believe, in North Dallas. So T.D. Jakes has a bit of a family tree going on, and he has a bit of a pseudo-denomination going on, and one of the churches is a Potter's House church, and this church is helmed by Torrey Roberts and Sarah Jakes Roberts. That is T.D. Jakes' daughter, and presumably his son-in-law. So with that said, this is a church that definitely outsizes its own influence online than it does probably in person. And the reason why I'm saying that is twofold. One, their YouTube channel clearly has a lot of views going on here. This has 642,000 subscribers, and on any given video, they're getting easily 20,000. As you can see, their current videos get a lot of plays. 13,000, 6,100, or 6,100, 37,000, 23,000, 68,000, 20,000, 8,700, 27,000, 116,000, 340,000, 34,000, 58,000. This is clearly a church that gets a lot of views. And Sarah Jakes Roberts is a Christian celebrity in her own right. And I'm not affirming her faith when I use the term Christian celebrity, but clearly 566,000 subscribers on YouTube. She also has a very outstretched influence compared to her church. So the second reason why I bring this up is the fact that this church, a Potter's House church, has two locations, one in Los Angeles, the other in Denver. And the Denver one is shutting down. They are shutting down for good. And why? It's a ghost megachurch. They cite the declining donations in the Denver area, paired with the fact that they don't want to upkeep their apparently dilapidated building. So instead, they're going to sell their $12.2 million property, and that property is apparently going to be developed into a residential neighborhood and a park. So they're going to sell their $12.2 million property and just abandon that congregation that they had, because when they locked down their church in disobedience to God, their congregation didn't show back up and they stopped giving. Now, there's a lot of results as far as churches and giving goes, and most part, it's a negative story to tell. People did not return as much. And that is a pretty common story among churches that chose the route of Branch Covidianism, because they basically said we're non-essential and their congregation agreed. That's the story that happened at a Potter's House in Denver, Colorado. And it's interesting that that has not happened in LA, but I do not think it's going to happen in LA, regardless of how low their attendance gets in LA. Not saying that it's low at all. You can't really tell from the YouTube videos because they don't really show a lot of crowd shots in their live streams. But with that said, this is a church that has a thriving online ministry presence. As you can see, again, I went through their YouTube metrics. Their YouTube metrics are outstanding. And you should definitely subscribe to the Evangelical Dark Web because we need to catch up to that. No, I'm just kidding. I don't really want that many subscribers, or I don't care to get that many subscribers. But with that said, at least help me get to 2,000, that's for sure. And this is a church that has an online YouTube ministry, and they probably make a lot of money because, as you can see from their current messages, nothing really controversial. Probably a lot of motivational speeches and TED Talks and stuff like that. Very trite pablum that gets a lot of views on YouTube, especially when you have Sarah Jakes Roberts, who's kind of a celebrity preacher on her own. And, you know, they don't need to touch the hard-hitting subjects for attention or at all. Why jeopardize their YouTube-approved preaching content? So they're going to operate in LA, and they're going to maintain that foothold on the internet because they're doing very well on there. But they could not be bothered to subsidize a struggling location in Denver. And, you know, that's not to say it wasn't struggling because of their own fault and their own decisions. The fact that they, you know, abandoned their congregation in March of 2020 and then want to abandon them again. Again, there's par for the course. But again, their congregation in Denver apparently was not chipping in enough. Again, these kind of are prosperity preachers, so you're not quite sure whether that church was really unsustainable or out of their own greed and financial motive, they wouldn't want to sustain the church. Could be multiple motivations for that. But in any case, this is a church that locked down in disobedience to God and suffered the consequences for it. They have to downsize one location, and that is for the best. So with that said, we shouldn't shed a tear about this story. It is just another example of a megachurch boasting a much greater influence and a much greater size and not really delivering it because they, again, have to downsize. So obviously what they do as a church is not as franchisable because that's what this is. That's what the location was. It was a franchise, not a real church, a church franchise, like a Hillsong. Or a Life.Church. So, go to a real church. I do want to leave off with that. Go to a real church that won't abandon its congregation because of a cold. So, and also believe in the gospel. Believe in the gospel that Jesus Christ died for your sins on the cross and was raised from the dead to prove that he was God. And, you know, earned reconciliation with God because you could not earn it on your own. You couldn't earn that on your own. So you're now, you know, as a Christian, you become reconciled with God because of the work of Christ. And that's pretty cool. So with that said, that's all I got to say about that. My name is Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web. If you like this kind of content, subscribe to the channel because, again, I got a long ways to go if I want to catch up to Sarah Jakes Roberts. So with that said, that's all I got to say about that. Leave a comment, and I will catch you on the next one.